I'm your host, Grayson Brulte. Welcome to another episode of SAE Tomorrow Today, a show about emerging technology and trends in mobility with leaders and innovators to make it all happen. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to be joined by Hemant Sikaria, CEO and co-founder of Sibros. On today's episode, Hemant and I discuss the future of over-the-air updates, what it means, what the impact is, and why the future of automotive is bright. We hope you enjoy this episode. Hemant, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
It's great to have you here because we're going to get into a topic that's a big pet peeve of mine, that more companies should follow the lead, and you have the experience from your days at Tesla. Over-the-air updates. They're magical. The car only gets better. If you look back at older components, and let's look at Sonos. The Sonos, so you buy the Sonos and they have the software update. It only gets better. They're putting all new compression algorithms for their audio. You buy a Tesla, and it's getting better. There's new features. Outside of FSD, there's still critical features. There's app features. It gets better. Why do more OEMs not get to the realization, we sell you a car, we can sell you a connectivity package, and oh, by the way, it'll only get better. It's not going to start this cycle of, it's going to get worse. Why are they not embracing this?
I think that over time, I've seen more and more automakers embrace it, but there's also a lot of execution challenges that come with it. There's a mindset shift that is required. There's a philosophy change. There's cultural changes within the automaker. So there's a lot of inertia and a lot of blockages that they have to work through before they can deliver something like this end to end. And they definitely do understand that this is an important aspect that the customers and the consumers care about. It's a matter of delivering that to them. It all started with sort of developing and delivering infotainment updates. And that's what majority of the automakers are able to do. So, but that's not what Tesla does. That's maybe 1% of what Tesla does, the updates, right? It's all about the rest of the vehicle, whether it's a EV or a combustion engine, whether it's a truck or a car or a motorcycle. They all have different components, different electrical control units that have software that need to be updated, and that needs to be orchestrated, that needs to be coordinated because it drives the vehicle. It's a critical function of the vehicle. And that's why it's also hard to do it, because it's such a complex system to solve, complex problem to solve.
You have a lot of coordination, or if you're there and you're leading the orchestra, you have to, okay, we need more bass, we need more flute, whatever it might be. Is that another layer of software? Is that where Sibros comes in? Do you become the band leader and you're telling, okay, we're going to update component A, we're going to update component B? Does your software become that band leader?
Yeah, essentially, you could think of us as a band leader, but we're also playing an instrument at the same time. So we're doing multiple roles, and in some cases, we might be a one-person band, meaning there's no one else that the OEM is relying on. So we're delivering the whole end-to-end solution. In other cases, we may only be playing an instrument. We may not be doing the full orchestration either, because they may have already built their orchestration layer and some of their management layer internally, and we can help provide certain tools and certain infrastructure to augment what they already have so that it's a more comprehensive solution. So there are multiple ways that we can work with automakers, and each automaker is different. They're at a different point in their journey, and we want to make it so that it's flexible for all of them to be able to get to having a better SDV solution.
Even if you look at some, let's call them the traditional automakers that are starting to, let's say, dip their toe in the water when it comes to the over-the-air updates, they still have this fascination that the Wi-Fi at my house doesn't work and I have to go to a dealership to do an over-the-air update. I don't understand that. Your Tesla, you just connect it to your Wi-Fi and you get a push notification that says, okay, please know you can't drive the vehicle for 60 minutes. We have to update it. You opt into that. It gives you the very nice countdown. But traditionally, you have to go to the dealer because he's professional. Give me a break. We update our iPhones, which is a very complicated machinery. Why do you think some OEMs are taking this 1 foot in, 1 foot out approach to over-the-air updates, when if you look at the consumer data, they clearly want to be able to update their vehicle on their own when they want?
Exactly right. I think it's more just a transition phase before they get to be more like Tesla. And the consumers are very loud and sharing their feedback with the automakers now. So I do think it will happen more quickly as long as the automaker has the capability to do it.
Do you see a point where the consumer can push that automaker, say, well, listen, if you're not going to embrace this, we're just going to go buy your competitor's vehicle, and all of a sudden sales start going down? Look, we saw it with electrification. If I could make a very profound argument, if it wasn't for Tesla, we would not be having an electric vehicle conversation today.
Yeah.
And I can make the same argument for over the air, and then for FSD, and going down the line. As more of the, let's call it traditional OEMs, go into software, does that start to force the hand, perhaps?
Absolutely. I think that even within our team of employees at Sibros, we've had so many people that have switched between brands because they had a poor software experience with their previous vehicle. And I think it's an eventuality that the consumer will be able to have more impact and have more say into what the automakers are doing. I do think that consumers today already have a voice in this, and the automaker may just not know why their sales are plummeting or changing. But this is one of the contributing factors to that. Right. Having a good software experience. It's not just the OTA, it's also the software experience, kind of to what you were mentioning about Wi-Fi and Tesla. I have my Tesla, but I don't park my vehicle at near a Wi-Fi area. It's not connected to my personal Wi-Fi. So it routinely notifies me that, hey, it would be better if you could connect to your Wi-Fi, right? But at the end of the day, if many weeks pass and I have not connected to my Wi-Fi, it will still deliver the update anyway using cellular bandwidth. So Tesla does try to reduce their own cost if they can, but at the end, they do care a lot about the consumer experience, and they take on that additional cost for the few percent, maybe 5-10% of owners that do not live close to a Wi-Fi connection, right? So I do think that the shift is happening, and we're seeing that across the industry.
You hit the nail on the head on that one. You didn't have to go to a dealership or the Tesla showroom to update it. You were able to do it over cellular, because that goes back to the user experience. When do we get to a point, in your opinion, where every model year vehicle, both traditional OEMs and newer OEMs, such as the Rivians, are being able to be updated over the air? Is it 2030, 2032? Do you have any insights of when you think, based on the Sibros platform and the insight that you have, that all these vehicles will be able to be updated over the air?
I had a prediction on this and I was wrong. So when I started the company in 2018, I was very confident that there's no way there's going to be any automaker that isn't doing Tesla style self updates and full vehicle updates, calibration parameter updates, setting out new features, collecting good data from the vehicles with user consent and privacy in mind, of course. But doing all of these things, to me, were a no-brainer, and I was very confident that we would get to that point by 2025. We're now at the end of 2024, and I can confidently say there are less than a half dozen automakers globally that have a comprehensive solution that can deploy updates to more than just the infotainment system, that can do it reliably, that use it reliably and regularly, and can do it cost effectively. I think Tesla does it very cost effectively. For them, it's very easy to push out an update because they've really streamlined the whole end-to-end process. But we've talked to a lot of large automakers which spend a lot of money and a lot of manual effort because of their methodology of doing things is different from how we do it and how Tesla does it, right? So I think that leads to this problem of not being able to use software updates more regularly. And I think we're probably another 4 or 5 years out. And I hope that this time I'm wrong again and that it's earlier than that. But that's right now, from all our conversations happening in the industry and all the things we see, it seems like it's still far away.
It's unfortunately far away. We want it to be sooner because it's a better consumer experience. What can over-the-air updates unlock for OEMs? This is more the traditional OEMs outside. I'm sorry, I got to give this dig. Outside of selling you a subscription to turn your heated seats on, that was a bad move. But outside of that faux pas or that mistake, what can they truly unlock for global OEMs?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things from a software update perspective. One is to reduce physical recall so you don't have to go to the dealership. That's a big one. And I think there's two pieces to that first one itself, right? You can't just do an update and call it a day. You actually have to collect data from the vehicle to prove that the update fixed the problem that existed. So in my case, I used to have a non-Tesla vehicle at some point in the last 7 years. And that vehicle got recalled for a software update. I scheduled an appointment, took it into a dealership. It was a security related recall. It took me a month to get it scheduled because there were hundreds of thousands of vehicles that were affected. So that was a frustrating experience. I knew I was driving an unsafe vehicle. I had no choice. Once I got the update, I thought the problem's gone away. 6 months later, I got another recall from the same automaker for the same issue because they realized that they didn't actually fix the issue. And if they had the ability to do over-the-air updates and collect data to prove to themselves and to the federal government that they've actually fixed the problem, then they could have avoided that second recall. They could have sent out a software patch, a second patch to fix the problem, right? So I think that's number one of many things that the OEMs struggle with. And, so yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Think about the large amount of expenditure that costs the OEM, and think about all the productivity loss from a time perspective of you having to make the appointment, go in there. It's highly inefficient where the software can just scale it. Do you think traditional OEMs take that "we don't trust you" route because they hide behind cybersecurity when you and I both know that there is ways to do it safely today? Do you think that becomes the boogeyman? And if it does, how do we overcome that from a cyber perspective to where the OEMs trust it?
I actually think that getting an update at their dealership makes me more nervous than getting it over the air. And I'll just share my thought process behind this. When I took my vehicle in, they said, "Hey, we have to pull apart panels from the door." I said, "What? You can't just connect to the OBD port or to some other way to the CAN bus in the vehicle?" And I said, "No, we have to pull these panels apart because it's a network that is not visible at the OBD port." Okay, so they pulled apart these panels. They plug something in, they do the software update, they put the vehicle back, and then they say, "Well, just to be sure, we're going to have our technician go for a test drive of the vehicle to make sure everything works well." That is extremely scary to me, that I now depend on the quality control of a technician that does not necessarily know what the update was for and what to check for. Why can't that be a more controlled process and the validation for that update be done beforehand by the automaker? And usually what we hear from the automakers, hey, validation is very complex and we have so many combinations of vehicles and components, we can't test everything. And that's fair. But I do think that you can follow the Pareto principle and cover 80% of the typical vehicle builds and test for that with a small fleet of 100 or 1,000 vehicles, and then roll it out to a bigger fleet. So I actually think it's less safe to do an update in the dealership. And then the second part, from a cybersecurity perspective, I think that cybersecurity is going to be a bigger and bigger topic as vehicles become more connected. If you look at the event that Tesla did recently with, their supervised full self-driving vehicles and sort of their other new events and new things that they're launching, they can't do that without sort of admitting that there's a cybersecurity element to it, right? There's a if a Waymo can drive you and it can take you where you want to go, it could also easily take you where you don't want to go, if someone does control the entire vehicle network. So there's a lot of consideration at the vehicle level and at the fleet level from a cybersecurity perspective that we will all learn over the years. But it definitely is a big focus for us to make sure that this system is secure. And we've implemented certain things like the Optane standard, which is used quite extensively to protect vehicles during software updates and reduce cybersecurity risks. But there are a lot of things that everyone can and should do to minimize the impact of cybersecurity on vehicles.
From a Sibros perspective, how much encryption are you using on the vehicles, both on vehicle and during the update process?
So we have in the vehicle, we use typically the HSM, which is a hardware-based security module, and we store keys and in the HSM, and we also use TLS. We use sort of the industry best practices, and we also work with some sort of more sensitive type of vehicles, let's just say, and for those vehicles, we need to have military grade encryption and for the data that we collect, it has to be encrypted at rest in the cloud. And we have to have different keys for each vehicle, different keys for each component in the vehicle, so that we cannot accidentally do something. Even if someone is able to hack into or compromise part of our system, we want to minimize the attack surface area, and that's what we do using an implementation of the Optane standard, which is becoming an ISO standard as well.
Obviously, the data gathering, we know across the board, commercial, military, it's called civilian, consumer, they're all gathering data. When going back to the band leader, do you say, okay, the vehicle's going to collect this amount of data, or are you going to play this instrument? How does that work in terms from a data gathering standpoint? Since obviously on the defense, you have national security interests. On the consumer side, you have privacy interested. We're going to get this in a minute, but on the off-road, you have interest in how is the tillage, how is the soil. So you have different types of data that you're trying to gather. How you, Sibros, as a band leader, do you determine what data that you're giving to your customers?
Great question. So we think of ourselves more as the orchestrator, but the music that needs to be played is determined by the automaker. That kind of go on your analogy there. So what that means is that we provide the ability to play any kind of music, and the OEM can choose what music they want to play. So the automaker can choose what data they want to collect and at what frequency based on what events are happening in the vehicle. They make all of these configurations in our front-end web portal, and from there they can deploy that to a fleet of vehicles. And the vehicles then can immediately start collecting the data that the automaker wants. So someone can run a data campaign an analyst can run a data campaign on the cloud to say, hey, I want to see how many two-seater convertibles that we have in our fleet, which typically go on rides with two people, right? How often is the passenger seat occupied? Okay, well, they can make a configuration to say if vehicle enters the drive state, the drive gear, if the occupant sensor on the passenger side is enabled, that means there's a passenger. Raise this event and report it to the cloud. So now you can collect this kind of data from the entire fleet and say, okay, 52% of rides happen without a passenger, and 30% of rides in the morning happen with a passenger, or we see more weekend drives where there's a passenger in the vehicle. So that's one example. But they can collect any type of data that they want, not just occupant sensor data, but battery data, other data. There's a element of user privacy and user consent. And because of AI, those challenges are becoming more and more intricate. So typically, what was considered personally identifiable information, or PII, was the VIN number of the vehicle and GPS coordinates. That's kind of how it started back in the day. Now, based on the driving pattern and the seat positions and the music preferences, you can very easily identify who that driver is. And so more and more of the vehicle data is becoming PII, personally identifiable. And so there's a lot of challenges, and it's an uncharted territory for most OEMs. And we help with that because we have certain consent policies that are built into our platform and that are also very flexible for the automaker to publish to the end consumer. And the end consumer can say, I don't want you to collect any data. Okay, we're not going to collect any data. I want you to collect only battery data. Okay, we will collect only battery data. Or, so there's certain refinements that they can do for collecting certain specific sets of data that can then help the automaker improve their product or improve security or run a new campaign to launch a new feature that they think that their customers or consumers want.
Is any of that data being used to help to lower maintenance costs, since the maintenance costs on certain types of vehicles is very, very expensive?
I would say that we were doing quite a bit of that at Tesla before even when I was there, which was, 8-9 years ago at this point. And we see a lot of automakers talk about it and they want to do it, but really haven't seen as much as we would like to on that front. One of our solutions that's really exciting that we provide is the customer, which is the automaker, can set up these events for certain things that are happening in the vehicle. And based on those events, trigger a notification to a service center or a common sort of global service center, which can say, oh, this problem has been identified on this vehicle. They can call up the customer and say, you have this problem happening, and we would like to do a software update to fix the problem, or we want you to come into the dealership to get this problem fixed. We've already ordered the part, and we will make sure that it is ready for you. So yes, it's terrible that the consumer has to do something that there's a problem, but at the end, the consumer is also happy that their vehicle was proactively being taken care of by the automaker and that they got a great consumer experience. So this is something that can be done. And then they can also use remote commands through our platform to remotely diagnose the problem. So if there's a warning lamp that's on in the vehicle, they can send certain codes or commands down to the vehicle securely and either clear the diagnostic trouble codes or request for more information and then determine what to do to solve the problem. So there's a lot of things that can be done to do preventative maintenance, but we don't see enough of that today from the automakers. But we're seeing more and more of our customers be able to use our solution to solve this problem and connect different pieces of data and create a better consumer experience.
Why do you feel that your customers are leaning into this when the OEMs are not necessarily leaning into it?
I think that the OEMs typically see everything from a software perspective or anything after the vehicle has been manufactured and sold as a cost center. And that's a very big problem, which that's a mindset shift that needs to happen. Tesla does not see it that way. And that is why Tesla will proactively take on additional costs to deliver a great consumer experience and keep pushing the limits on their brand and the brand loyalty that they have. And that's a systemic problem at the OEMs. The CFO has to buy into this cost. The procurement, the engineering, the product, the CEO, the board, the shareholders have to buy into this. Yes, we will have an additional cost, but that additional cost is an investment into securing our future and our brand. And I think without that systemic shift happening, they're going to struggle with this.
You're right. Because then the goal of an OEM today, not tomorrow, but today, is to sell vehicles. Tomorrow, I believe it's going to be subscriptions. Because then you have to build that loyalty, and then your consumer gets hooked on, say, the Tesla experience. They're not going back to another vehicle. What do you mean? I don't have a key. This thing just works. Okay, why can't other vehicles? And they start to challenge and question the status quo. Especially, I've seen it with older individuals. So your customers are gathering a immense amount of data. There's one industry more than anything that loves data for their underwriting and their actuary tables is insurance. Are there any insurance implications to all this data that you're gathering, potentially helping to lower the cost of insurance or get better underwriting? Any insurance implications?
I would say that insurance is a very specific use case and example, and the data set that they would need is very specific, and it would have to be coordinated between the insurance underwriter as well as the automaker and the end consumer to deliver something of value. I think the technology pieces are there. We have those blocks in place, and we know some other automakers also have their own internally developed blocks that are in place, but there isn't one sort of easy way to do this end to end. And I think there's a lot of room and a lot of potential, but I think the OEMs first have to collect the right data with insurance as a use case in mind before they can offer this to their consumers. So, for example, today, an insurance company using a phone or mobile app-based insurance will use specific machine learning models and other things to determine that what the vehicle speed is, and whether the vehicle is driving or going in reverse. And, all of these things are actually just naturally available on the CAN bus or the Ethernet network within a vehicle and does not require any machine learning or AI. But because they don't have access to that data is why they have to do all of this additional work. There's a lot of other things that we could be collecting from vehicles to underwrite a better policy. Okay, you're driving 65 miles an hour on the highway, and the front radar says that you are less than 2 seconds behind the car in front of you, which means that in case there was an emergency situation, you have a high chance of collision. Okay, based on that, give feedback to the driver that your driving score is lower. Based on that, and if you see that as a pattern, increase their insurance premiums. All of that data is available today. It's just a matter of piecing it together. And we can collect that data, but the insurance companies and the automakers have to work together to make it happen.
So they have to come together to make it actionable, or is there something that you can deploy to make it actionable for that customer?
I would say it's a business thing. So the insurance company has to say to the OEM, look, we want this kind of data. We have a pre-integrated solution with Sibros backend APIs. If you were to use Sibros on your vehicle fleet, we would be able to collect this data. We will pay you $10 per subscribed vehicle per month for this data, and we will use that to sell our insurance products. Okay, so that's what the insurance company has to go sell or tell the automaker. But the insurance company has to do an integration with us first, and we have to do an integration with the OEM. So there's a lot of pieces that need to come together for this, and the insurance company has to believe that the value is there for them, and the OEM has to believe that, yes, we do want to do this, and we do think that we want to get this additional revenue. It's worth our time to invest into this, right? So it's more of a business challenge than a technology challenge at this point.
So in simple terms, Sibros in this case becomes the plumbing, because if you look at some of the statements made by the global OEMs, they're going to move to a subscription-based service. I've spoken to some very large underwriters, and the global OEMs are going to take the risk on their cap tables, then reinsure it. So in a scenario where, let's call it Acme OEM is running an AV service, they're selling it to you as a subscription for personally owned, they're underwriting the insurance, the Sibros plumbing could go in there essentially if the business case made sense, and that's what the OEM wanted to do.
Absolutely, yeah. That's right.
So that's getting interesting. So that's the automotive side of your business. Outside of the automotive side of your business, because that's well covered, are you looking at ag that I alluded to earlier, looking at off-road mining? What other industries are you looking at? Because it seems to me that if you want to use the band leader term or the plumbing term, that your software is very compatible across a variety of industries.
Yeah, we're pretty excited because we see a lot of potential in other industries and other segments beyond just the passenger vehicle segment. And we found that the engagement model and how we work with different companies is very different. So with the passenger vehicle OEMs, we are taking more of a co-development model where we bring certain tools and products and code, and they then leverage that and build things on top of it, or use certain pieces of our product portfolio, and they work with us to develop new features, new capabilities that are unique to them. So that's how we would see sort of more and more of the engagements happening on the passenger vehicle side, because they typically have big in-house IT and firmware and product teams, and they want to have more control over this, which is understandable. So we want them to have that control. We are a sort of an accelerator for that journey. With other segments, what we find is that the automakers or motorcycle manufacturers, they don't have the in-house capability or know-how or interest in owning this kind of a solution end to end. They would rather work with a company that provides the whole end-to-end holistic solution as a SaaS offering. And so our approach with those types of companies is that, look, we have our entire solution that we can offer. You can use everything from our product portfolio, and you don't have to worry about any of this critical infrastructure that you want. We provide that for you. So those are the two ways we engage. And we've seen a lot of great momentum and traction from the motorcycles and from commercial vehicles, commercial trucks and buses. Those are two segments where I would say in the US we've got a majority of the names on our platform that are newer in their journey, right? So meaning any provider that is starting their EV journey typically uses us, even though we're not limited to EVs. So it's either new age OEMs that are, startups, I would say, or it's larger companies that have an EV division that want to start us there. And that's usually how we get a foot in the door. They see good success there, and then we expand further to do, the diesel trucks and the, other commercial vehicles. We're also seeing interest from companies that make jet skis and boats and mining equipment, ag equipment, tractors. And we're seeing this traction happening across not just the US, but across the European market as well as the Asian market. And we've got a lot of momentum building in those three geographies.
Do you see the momentum coming from these OEMs realize that the product must get better after selling it, or they're going to go to their competitors? Is that what's driving it, or something else that's driving this?
Yeah, I heard this quote recently, which really struck with me about sort of software-defined vehicles. What it really means is the vehicle that you buy is the least good vehicle that you buy, and that it gets better over time. And it is in direct contrast with how we've thought about vehicles up until now, which is when you buy the vehicle, it's the best it possibly can be. And then as soon as it leaves the showroom, it's depreciated and you start losing value and it's lower quality. So I think because more and more things are being software driven, the quality can actually improve, the feature set can actually improve over time after the vehicle is bought. And we're seeing this as a big mindset shift that the OEMs are trying to adopt, but it's very difficult to change how things have been done for a century when you have 100,000 or more employees that are used to working in certain ways. The very things that made them successful based on the process and the culture they built are the obstructions for them to be successful in the future, because now they need to change their process, their mindset, their culture to adapt a new way of doing things.
There is a new way of doing things, and there's an old way of doing things, which is concerning to a lot of folks. Is Regulators. As everything becomes software defined and connected, what are the regulatory concerns? Because obviously the software is moving a lot faster than the regulators.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of regulatory challenges, and it's a very fast evolving landscape because of AI, and AI is also being introduced into the vehicles. So there's privacy concerns, there's security concerns, and there's potential safety concerns because of the security concerns that might come up. And there's a lot of good work that can be done from a regulatory perspective to bring a little bit more order to the chaos, uh, while also not holding down the industry from innovating. And I think that's the balance that a regulator has to play is how do we make sure that innovation continues, but we routinely upgrade our baseline of expectations and requirements from vehicles without telling each automaker how they have to fulfill those specific requirements. So I think lane assist or emergency rear brakes, those are great examples of regulations that have been rolled out, which doesn't tell the automaker how to solve the problem, but they just say, these are the requirements that your vehicle has to meet from a safety perspective. So I think the same thing can be done on a connected vehicle perspective to say, we always need to know what are all the software and hardware components in every vehicle at any given time. And so it's kind of like a software audit and have that available in the cloud at any time from any vehicle in the fleet. And that's something that we help provide too. But the point is like there are a lot of things, very basic things that are still missing. And I would love to have more conversations with anyone in the regulatory space that we could help inform what new regulation or policy can be put in place to help the industry move forward.
It's an important conversation to have. It's that almost that if you can have a regulatory framework to work towards, or the industry comes together and say, okay, we're all going to work towards this. The regulator says, okay, if you work within this sandbox, we'll allow it. If you need to go outside the sandbox, there has to be, I'll use the term, a clear line of communication where the regulator can't put their head in the sand. There has to be willingness to engage. And we saw recently, yesterday actually, where the FAA approved Joby in the eVTOL. So that was a big regulatory breakthrough. So the FAA can approve eVTOLs, but the DOT cannot approve autonomous vehicle framework. So that I don't get, and that I don't get. But and I'm not making a comment because this is not the right form to make a comment. But it goes into having a conversation. That's what we're doing here today, and hopefully with over-the-air updates, more comments are made on that. Hemant, in your opinion, what does the future of over-the-air updates look like?
I think it'll get to a point where we'll see more consolidation of hardware happening in the vehicles. And that will mean that the complexity of the type of software that's required will change. It will not be less complex. The type of complexity will change. Right now, what we are working with automakers, they have anywhere between 30 to 120 different microcontrollers and components in the vehicle that they want to update. So that's a different type of challenge. Over the years, those components will get consolidated and shrink, and processors will get more powerful. And we may end up with a vehicle that only has 5 or 6 really big, beefy processors that are managing all of the workloads. And we've seen some architectures, and Tesla is also kind of accelerating that journey and kind of leading the way there. But when that happens, the complexity shifts from managing updates on 100 components to 5 components, but those 5 components now have multiple different operating systems. They might be running Android, QNX, Linux. They might have bare metal or embedded, processing capability, and the ability to update all of those separate partitions on each of those control units becomes fairly complex. And so I think the complexity will shift and mold over time. But I think that is probably more of the steady state that we will see in the coming years. Ideally, it would be great to have just one controller in the vehicle that controls everything, but that's not possible, mainly because the amount of wiring that would have to go from that one controller all over the vehicle to control the tail lights and the headlights versus having multiple distributed controllers sort of controlling each zone. That reduces the amount of wiring required. So I think the steady state is probably like 4 or 5 big controllers that have supplier software, in-house built software, all running on sort of a standard middleware, and being able to control different functions like brakes and lights and security features or motor control features, all from that same hardware unit. So I think that's kind of where I think things will go for passenger vehicles and commercial vehicles, and I do think that this will happen in the next 5 years.
And that's where the importance of a standardized software layer that you're building at Sibros comes in, because you're going to allow the vehicles, both commercial, civilian, defense, to only get better over time. Hemant, I learned a lot today. This has been fascinating, so thank you. As we look to wrap up this insightful conversation, what would you like our listeners to take away with them?
I would say that the future of automotive is very exciting, and there's a lot of change happening, and I would encourage more people to participate in the industry and in the conversation and help drive the industry forward. And software updates represents, 1% of, or even less of the overall number of challenges and areas of innovation that the auto industry is experiencing. And so there's a lot of room to make a big impact on vehicles and how we move. And yeah, I think the timing couldn't be better for more folks to be involved in the industry. So that's probably the sort of big takeaway.
I agree. Our listeners agree. The future of automotive is exciting. I'll emphasize it's super exciting. Today is tomorrow. Tomorrow is today. The future is Sibros. Hemant, thank you so much for coming on SAE Tomorrow Today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to SAE Tomorrow Today. Be sure to join us next week for another episode of Tomorrow Today Briefs with sustainability editor Roberto Baldwin. Roberto will sift through the latest trends in the rapidly evolving transportation sector as it transitions from fossil fuels to sustainable energy.
SAE International makes no representations as to the accuracy of the information presented in this podcast. The information and opinions are for general information only. SAE International does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast.